Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Truth We Hide podcast. Thank you guys so much for staying in touch with our weekly podcast. Today's guest is Shelley Knight. She is a once upon a time nurse, clinical hypnotherapist, and a writer who provides an eclectic blend of clinical and spiritual expertise in her specialist subjects of positive psychology, spirituality, and end of life. She's also an author of Positive Changes. It's a self-kick book, and the host of Positive Changes, a self-kick podcast. So, Shelley, I'm really excited to have you on here. You have a lot to talk about, and I can't wait for you to share your message with our listeners. So thank you for being on here today.
Oh, bless you. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So tell us about your story.
So I had a bit of a crazy upbringing, but you don't think it's crazy when you're going through it. You just think that's the norm. Sure. But I was raised in a home with my parents, grandparents, and anyone passing could just join in, really. And we spoke really openly about death and things like that. We always did. So I always thought I was okay around the subject of it. And probably why I went into nursing, actually. So I went into nursing and I worked with, end of life and things like that. But I think my life-changing event was actually when my late stepfather died suddenly in 2005. And then despite all the life lessons and the openness around death and dying, it was just a really huge grief journey for me. And bless, it would have been his birthday this week, actually. But he died 16 years ago. And so from that life-changing event, very slowly, I admit, but I've just been on a grief journey, and now I help others at times of loss, not always death, but during times of loss, I help others to find something to create into a positive change.
That's really wonderful, because it's really hard to talk about death. I know it's hard for me to talk about it. And I'm really bad at talking about it with my own children. So it's not something that I like, but it's hard. And so for you to provide that space to be able to talk about it, I think that's something that's really needed. So I also love that you grew up feeling comfortable enough to talk about it. Not many families are able to do that. So once you got older, and how did you decide that this is what you wanted to do along with your own grief journey?
So when I look back now, Annette, it's a bit strange. I think, what was I thinking? But I have many moments like that in my life, if I'm honest. But when my dad died suddenly, I actually was at work nursing at the time when I got the call, and sort of obviously went home to be with my family. And not the most caring profession, but for me, by the evening, there was phone to say when you're back at work. So I did go back to work quite soon after. But it was actually 3 months later where it all kind of, the proverbial poo hit the fan and hit rock bottom like we did. And because my dad had died so suddenly, bizarre as it may seem, I then went to work in palliative care and end of life, because I wanted to know what it was like if it's not suddenly, if you have that chance to say goodbye. And so I went there kind of just to escape from the ward where I'd had the bad news. But it was like a calling when I got there, and I absolutely loved it. And so I only left nursing last year. For many, many years, that was my background, end of life. And it's beautiful. I think what I learned actually is whether it's sudden death or not, you don't always say what you think you're going to say anyway. Mm-hmm. But it was beautiful. I did learn a lot from the dying of ways to live, but it was part of my healing journey. And I know it doesn't sound the most obvious way to go and work with more death, but actually it helped me. It did really help me. And that's what I've done now. I sort of, talk quite openly about end of life, and I speak really openly with my children about death. And they do have little strange moments, like if one's away somewhere on a sleepover, one will say, "Are they dead? Do we just replace them?" And I'm like, "Well, no, they're just on a sleepover." But they're very open around death, like my childhood was. I mean, obviously it didn't prepare me for the reality of death, but I still think it's really important that we do speak openly about death, you know, our only certainty in life. And so recently I've opened up a death cafe over here in the UK, and it's just for my local community where they can come along. And just, there's no like formal counselling or anything. It's just people who've been grieved coming together to talk from their pain point. And they're all on different stages of the grief journey. And I think it's really surprising whether your husband's died, your mother, a friend, there certainly are elements of connection. There's some underlying foundation that you have the same emotions, the same grief signs and symptoms that come up. And it's a really beautiful thing. I know I've got a bit of slack for setting one up. Like, it's really miserable, you know, just let people die, Shelley. But, you know, I'd seen for many, many years with my nursing that, you know, it's a beautiful place to be at the end of life. You become part of the family. But just when someone dies, that's not the end of the journey. Do you know what I mean? Like, when a patient dies, part of the family's life dies, but they really do need to move forward in life. And that's why I set up the Death Cafe. That's why I'm still passionate, get people talking about death, because it's just life-changing for those left behind.
So you are so right. And as I'm hearing you speak about opening up that cafe, it makes me start to think about, I've joined a trauma survivors network here where we do meet once a month to talk about our trauma, whatever trauma it was. It gives us, we were given a space to all come together, because it's hard to talk about it with people who don't want to talk about it or who don't understand. So I think it's such an important thing that you've done, is to bring people together to be able to talk about those feelings that they aren't able to talk about with anybody else. So I don't think it's morbid at all. I mean, in the beginning, people would, of course, they're going to think, well, gosh, why would you want to sit around and talk about death? Well, that's how some people, that's how they heal, is to talk about it. And I think that's pretty amazing that you did that. I know that here, it has helped me for many. No, I was in a car accident a couple years ago, but I held it in, and I didn't want to put my family through me talking about it all the time. So to be able to go somewhere to talk to other people that have gone through stuff like that it's really changed me. So that's pretty amazing that you've done that.
Yeah, and I get what you're saying, and that's exactly why I did set one up, because it is like, you know, grief journey, there is no time. Some people will find, you know, a joy and relief in it, and they, you know, think, right, life's too precious, I'm going to carry on. Others will, you know, dedicate their life to grief almost. But they get to that point almost, it's how we feel as humans, that we think, oh, I shouldn't still go on about it. It was, you know, 3 years ago, 15 years ago, when you absolutely should. If that's how you're feeling inside, then you should still be able to share your story. And that's why, you know, we should connect with like-minded people. I think there's a real healing in it.
I think so too. My cousin passed away last year, and he left behind his wife and his daughter, and we talk about him every now and then, but it's, you know, it's their way of healing to go through his pictures or the stuff he left behind. But it's hard, but you want to be able to talk about it without people going, oh God, not again, because you don't want to be judged, and you don't want to hold it in either. So I think that, people they have different stages of grief, and if they want to still talk about it 15 years later, I think they should.
Yeah, absolutely. It's still part of their life story, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think when you're still talking about it, you're still remembering them. And that's really important, because sometimes, well, always, all we have left is the love and the memories. So we should still talk about that love and the memories, I think.
I think so too. I keep sitting here thinking about all these things that I wish, I would have known about years ago. And I think you grieve even worse if you hold it in. But when you have other people to talk about it, it makes it a little bit easier. Like, yeah, they get it. They totally get it. Have you, and when did you start this cafe again?
So it just started last month. I've been trying to do it for about a year or so.
Uh-huh.
And I think the universe was like, not now, Shelley, not now, because just
Right.
everything went wrong that could go wrong. You know, there was no venue, there was like no interest. But the feisty nurse kept coming back thinking, but it's needed. And this time when I went to go for it, I was just inundated with people to volunteer, choice of 2 venues. It just all fell into place. So it was wonderful.
Wow. That's pretty amazing. So
Yeah.
what types of things do you talk to people about? What advice do you give them when they're currently going through that similar situation?
They have to share the memories. They have to be honest with themselves.
Mm.
You know, there's just so much that goes on. I think there's so many types of grief as well. Like when I did my nursing back in 2001, there was like 3 types of grief. It's kind of like normal grief, delayed grief, or absence. You was either like crying, not crying, or you would in the future.
Right.
There was just like 3 types of grief. But now, obviously, you have medical advancements and things like that. You know, there's about 17 types of grief. And so people are grieving for so many things. And it's not always death. It is like loss of jobs or addictions or relationships. Even loss of confidence can, you know, trigger a grief response. But we really need to get people, you know, talking about what's affecting them. Because, you know, grief can be so stressful. And I'm a great believer, better out than in.
Right.
But yeah, they should be able to talk about anything, the good and the bad. I think sometimes when people die, we just kind of put them on a pedestal, don't we? Only speak about the positive.
Yeah.
But not everyone's like that. You know, sometimes people feel bad about grieving because it was an abusive ex or something, or, you know, an ex-partner who's gone on to marry someone else, or it's a best friend. You think, oh, I shouldn't cry because it's more about her family. When actually, you know, we're as unique as our grief. And I think everyone should talk, cry, snot, whatever they need to do.
Right. Now, tell us a little bit about your book.
So, yeah, my dad, my beautiful stepfather, died back in 2005. And that wasn't really the last time I dealt with death. I went on a really bad fertility journey. People don't, it is because, you know, the truth that people don't know, isn't it? But so we have 4 children and they are gorgeous. And everyone just thinks I'm this fertile being. But actually, we had a really bad fertility journey and I lost many, many pregnancies, some of them multiple as well.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
So that's, you know, as we say, like the truth that we hide. But I'm out the other side now, and so is my body. It's beyond those years. I think I'm going into the crone elderly stage now. My goddess days are over in it. But yeah, so my beautiful stepfather died, and then more death was presented, more love and loss from my fertility journey. And it was on my last pregnancy where it was just horrific. It was started out as a multiple pregnancy. I think by 16 weeks, I was on like 7 types of medications to sustain the pregnancy. And then he went for the 20-week scan and was told, like, this baby's not viable. You know, she's not going to go beyond 28 weeks. And if you even get past there, she's never going to live outside of you. She doesn't have the lung capacity. She had a rare lung disorder. And so I went from my clinical nurse headset into everything I could possibly fling at this pregnancy, my last chance of another child, really. So I just threw myself down this crazy but totally brilliant path, if I'm honest, of everything: visualization, affirmation, psychic surgery, meditation, changing diet, fluids, positive thinking. And I just clung to all the positives in life. I never told the baby she was unwell. I did like colour healing, every spiritual hippie thing you could possibly think of, Annette, I had. I just like full on grabbed it by the horns and the tail, just the whole lot. And then lo and behold, despite medical advice, she made it. She's now 6, amazing, little earth angel, obviously sent here to save us. And it was from coming through all that, and it's probably why I left nursing as well, because it come from this clinical, logical, I know she has got, you know, limited lung capacity, her heart's not in the right place, all this kind of stuff. But having tried all the spiritual modalities, huge leap of faith, a little bit feisty to, you know, listen to the clinical advice, she made it. And it's a real turning point for me, because despite how hard it had been, I mean, even now he's probably a bit choked up, but despite how hard it had been, I realized I had like 100% survival rate in life so far.
Yeah.
So I started to then look at what had I tried, what had I done, what worked, what didn't work. And it just then made me look at, well, like when my stepfather died, all the other things I come through in life, all the regrets of the dying from my nursing days. And I wrote a book about it. So that is Positive Change is a Self-Kick book. And they're just bite-sized chapters. There's like 1 page per chapter. And there's no one way. So some chapters, one's called like Whoa Nelly, which tells you to slow down. Well, you know, it's no point going forward if you haven't got a clue where you're going. So one's called Whoa Nelly, tells you to slow down, think what you're doing. Another one, you know, would tell you to get off your bum, take a leap of faith. Some will say meditation. There's some old blog posts in there. There's some like real life stories. There's loads of personal development tools, but there's no one way. There's some real contrasting views, because, you know, everyone's been through their own trauma. Everyone's got their own story to tell. And my one journey of really rubbish fertility, you know, it's not going to resonate with everyone, but, you know, the speed up, slow down, the spiritual, the clinical, the mathematical, somewhere it will resonate with the reader.
Right.
And so that's why I wrote it. As just sort of like, because I think, you know, we all have those semicolon points in life where you get to a point where you think, is this where I end my story, or do I have the strength to carry on? Yeah. And I had this semicolon moment where I could have just finished it with my pregnancy with Daisy, but I didn't, you know, and she made it, I made it, my husband made it, and, you know, and life goes on, which is kind of one of my brand things now, life goes on. Yeah. So I wanted to help others, because I know when you're in it, you can't always see a way forward, or you don't want to see a way forward, but I really think we need to try. Absolutely. You know, in our sacred life, we really need to try. It's a privilege denied to many, and if we're here and can just try, then, you know, I'd always try and support people in that.
That's really beautiful. And thank you so much for sharing your story. That's really hard for people to talk about. Gosh, I'm so grateful that Daisy is here, and she's 6 years old and just is amazing. So that's, oh my gosh. Yes.
Yeah. And she's not even like a little average child. She has like really oversized, massive blue eyes, long blonde hair down to her butt. She looks like she should be a Disney princess, and she just has the most pure soul. And it really makes you look at like your beliefs that you were raised with and things like that. Because you look at her and you're like, if ever a child was meant to make it, it was her. She just has this most amazing, I don't know, aura, being, something about her. It's probably all the hippie stuff I applied into her, all the spiritual healing and that. She probably glows at night if I look closely.
I love it. Well, blessing for sure. And you're so right about life goes on. It's hard for people to think that way, but if you really, you know, dig deep and you start looking around, it's the little things that you appreciate, and life can go on. You just have to find that little blessing in front of you. And it's hard to see that sometimes when you have that, what you call it, the semicolon moment, because that's a dark place to be in. So to see the light at the end of the tunnel is such a hard thing to do, but it's possible.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I'm working on my second book at the moment, and I was writing about suicide because I remember as a student nurse, I went off my break on night duty, and I came back and everyone looked like in a state of shock. And I was like, what's going on? And one of our patients had tried to commit suicide behind like a curtain. Oh. And like all these, like my mentors, you know, the qualified nurses were trying to be really maternal and protect me. But in the nature of my work as a nurse, you know, my career was always going to be peppered with people, you know, trying to take their own life and stuff.
Right.
And it is really hard, and people don't speak about death, let alone suicide. And we really should, because I think, you know, many of us have moments where we just think, oh God, you know, and I don't think it's so much that those that commit suicide cross the line. I think there's probably a fine line within us rather than between us. I
Right.
think we all had those moments where we're so close to the edge. And I just think we should talk about mental health, you know, death, dying, successes, failures, everything. We just need to talk more. But I'm very chatty, so that's probably why I think that.
No, it's you are so right, and that's exactly why I decided to share my own story a few years ago, because we do need to talk about it. We need to all try and end that stigma, because it's so, the world out there makes it such an ugly thing to talk about, but it happens. We all have some negative thoughts one way or another, and we should be able to speak freely about it without people looking at us sideways or judging us for having those feelings. It's real, and I mean, it happens. So suicide or trauma or anything, I think we should be able to talk about it more, and we definitely need to.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really like shocking statistics. I'm sure it's something like, isn't it every 20 minutes someone commits suicide in the world? It's like shocking. And just like, I'm not saying if we spoke more we'd prevent it, but I just don't think there should be a stigma. You know, if someone gets to that point in their life, you know, I just think it's such a sadness around it.
It is. I wish we could prevent it, but I think by opening up more about it, it will help people talk about it more rather than holding it inside so much, because it can break you. It can break a person.
Yeah, it can.
Yeah. So I definitely think that we all need to just come together and keep sharing our stories and helping. I just want to help the world, but I know I can't. I just wish I could.
We'll try.
We will certainly try. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I appreciate what you do. I wish I could bring you to the States.
Come out on a Shelley mission.
Exactly. But but I'm glad you're doing it over there, because someone needs to, right? We need people all over the world to spread this message. And it's quite amazing. I thank you so much for doing what you do, for wanting to be on here to share this with our listeners, and for writing your book. And gosh, I'm just so grateful for your miracle baby and everything.
Oh, bless you.
Oh, I just think it's such a beautiful thing.
It's strange because I grew up with an openness around death and dying and things like that. But like when my stepdad died, took probably like a good 12 years for like this light bulb went. I went, oh, hang on, because he always used to say like life goes on, and I think I was some sort of, you know, grungy teenager with these like, you know, emotions going on, and he so didn't understand,
right?
You know, and I just, you know, was a goth, so maybe I was always destined to work with death and misery, I don't know, but he always used to say life goes on. And now that's my thing. If you find me on like social media, it's Shelley F Knight, life goes on. And I think when people see it, they might think, oh, she's a bit bullshit. But I don't say like life goes on as in it's easy. I think often the fact that life goes on is the most painful part. Right. Isn't it? I mean, because, yeah, so just, but as my dad always used to say it, and it took me 12 years to realise, actually, there's something in that. You know, not saying my dad was right all along. God forbid.
It does take us quite a few years after to finally admit that our parents were right about something, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's another pain point in life, isn't it?
It is. God forbid I'd say that she was right when I was 16, but now that I'm 44. Oh yeah, she wasn't crazy. She was right.
Yeah, all those relationships when they sort of never last. You try your hardest, don't you, to make it last?
Yes, very true. Oh my gosh. So where can people find you now?
So I'm on Facebook. I'm Shelley F Knight, Life Goes On. I'm also on Instagram, and I have my website. And then if you happen to be passing Northampton, we have the Death Cafe over there. I have my own podcast, which has just changed actually. So it's Positive Changes, a self-kick podcast. And the first season was 6 episodes of me talking to myself. Just like a solo show. So I was just like talking to myself, and it sort of drew on some of the pain points from the book. So it's like the search for happiness, the search for self-love, which I'm very passionate about. I think that's a very important one. We should have a really good relationship with ourselves. And then we spoke about from fear to faith, speaking your truth, where that was a bit controversial. So I ended the series on that one. And then we have season 2 coming out, and that's the guest shows. So there, I've got people coming on to share their own stories of inspirational change. And it wasn't how I saw the podcast going, but it's been beautiful. I've got people that have had like near-death experiences. I've had American Doctor, just real mixed bag of people, you know, rags to riches. And it's been an absolute blast and privilege and everything. So yeah, it's just more me talking really in it, isn't it? So that's why I love it probably.
That's amazing. I'm excited for you.
Oh, bless you. I say there's a bottle of wine, you stick a cork in me, wouldn't you, to silence me?
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much. I will put all of her links in the show notes. And again, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for being on here, for what you do.
Oh, thank you for having me. I feel absolutely privileged.
Oh, of course. Thank you.
If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's a creation tool that allows you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can also make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Thank you for listening to the Truths We Hide podcast, created by A Wild Ride Called Life. To find out more about our mission, visit www.awildridecalledlife.com.